Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, back again answering your questions here at the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. As always, reach out to me at bishopshomegrown@gmail.com and the YouTube comments below, or via any of my social media. If I don't get back to you immediately, please don't think I'm ignoring you. I'm likely not. I often miss messages, or they get put in my message request folder that I don't all the time see on my phone. So it does take me a while sometimes to get to those messages. But today we've got a really good question here from George Ale, who says, Alan, recently you made a short comment about flavor differences in rye whiskey when using malted rye versus raw rye, assuming that you gelatinize it like you do with corn and add malt or exogenous enzymes during the mash. Is there a discernible difference in flavor or aroma in the distillate? Thank you for keeping your YouTube channel alive. It's a real privilege to be able to communicate with a professional distiller who also knows the world of home distilling. Much appreciated, man. And as I've said many times, I really enjoyed doing this. I think it's cool. I learn as much from you guys as I already know. Sometimes you help correct problems and faults that I have. So it's cool for me to be able to do this sort of thing. I love talking to home distillers every bit as much as I love talking to professional distillers on Distillers Talk, or any of the other programs that I do out there. Oh, also be sure to check out Distillers Talk wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, there is a One Piece at a Time Sacred Profane podcast as well that is up on Spotify that you might want to check out. And if you're into the paranormal, of course, if you have ghosts, you have everything, which is wherever you get your podcasts, and often deals with haunted distilleries and things of that nature. So shameless plugs aside, let's jump into the meat of the question here. So typically, rye, even raw rye, doesn't need a high gelatinization temperature. About 170 is honestly fine for rye, and that's actually on the high point. You can actually get gelatinization of raw rye lower than that. You can get it down in the 145 to 160 range if you really want to, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But bear in mind too that rye malt has a very high diastatic power if it's well modified, so somewhere in the 190 range, so a little bit below distiller's malt at 250, but certainly in the high DP range. In fact, in the early days of distillation in the United States, rye malt was often used for conversion processes in grain whiskey, because you got to remember that the 6-row barley malt wasn't real commonly available. It was available sort of in areas from Tennessee, and Kentucky, Indiana, mostly in Tennessee. It was derived from beer barley from northern Scotland. So most of the time, a lot of people on the East Coast in the very early days, they were using rye malt to actually get their conversion on their grains. And as such, because it's already modified, you don't have to gelatinize rye malt. You can take it to 145 and hold it there for 15-20 minutes, and you should have everything you need out of it. Maybe go 30 minutes if you really want to. Typically on either way that I'm working on it, if I'm doing a rye whiskey, and I'm thinking like more of a Pennsylvania style, so let's just say for shits and giggles, 80% raw rye, 10% rye malt, 10% barley malt. I'll do the old step mash, which is stepping up. So you introduce your malts at the 110 stage, you go up to about 125, 130, you hold there for about 15-20 minutes and add your regular rye. Then you take that up to 145, try to get your conversion at that point, and then on up to 155 to 165 for a slight pasteurization. For a straight up rye malt whiskey, which would be 100% rye malt, I would just go straight up to 145 and hold there 30 minutes or so and get my conversion that way, and then crash cool, throw my yeast, etc. from that point on. As far as flavors, let me touch on one more thing here. So an example of Spirits of French Liquor I work at, we do make a rye whiskey. We make a couple rye whiskeys, but the main rye whiskey we make is called Solomon Scott, and it is the old George Washington mash bill. So was that 65-35? So 65 rye, 35 corn, and 5% malt. What we typically do there is we do take, we have to go up to 190 for at least about an hour, because the corn that's going in We'll drop to 170 and throw the rye in. We hold there for about 30 minutes. Then we drop to 145 and add the malt in, even though we are using some exogenous enzymes there. I suspect that old George Washington mash bill, there was probably quite a bit of rye malt actually in it. And that's just been missed out on over the years because there was no notation made of it. But that is the other way that we tend to make rye whiskey. As far as the flavor goes between raw rye and rye malt, bearing in mind that there are different varieties of rye. So one of the biggest misconceptions with rye is that rye is immediately spicy or peppery. This is not true. Oftentimes this is the result of distillers not understanding that there are compounds in rye that you don't want, so you should run it a little harder in the still to try to gasify some of that stuff and get rid of it. Of course, a lot of home distillers don't have vents on their stills. I've talked about this in other videos, so it's a little harder to do that. Sometimes it's because people use cheaper rye grain and there's some garlic seed in there. It does happen quite a bit even in the commercial industry. And various different varieties of rye just have their own flavor characteristics. I will say that I don't think that most of the traditional ryes that exist or did exist, and many of them are extinct now. Good luck finding a lot of the heirloom ryes out there. There's not very many of them, just a handful, and then finding them in bulk enough to even distill on a home level is a pain in the ass. Most of them are not of that spicy, peppery characteristic. Most of them are more floral. They're more layered. They're more textural, chewy. Think chewy, almost like chewy whiskey, like unctuous. Like when you take a drink of it, it makes you want to chew a little bit. Tend to have a little bit of lavender characteristics to them. That's what traditional raw ryes often taste like. Now, malted rye, which I love, and Limestone Branch was a great example of this. Limestone Branch, Steve Beam of Yellowstone fame, obviously Yellowstone bourbon, and the Dance and Beam families, you know, he's a descendant on both sides. He had a cool program where they were doing single barrels for like small restaurant accounts or smaller accounts that didn't want a full 53-gallon barrel, so they were doing 15-gallon barrels. And what he'd done is he went through and he came up with some unique mash bills, some of which I think he found some notes that were written on by his grandfather, where his grandfather would just sketch out a potential mash bill and how it should work and all that stuff, whether it was ever in production or not. And some I think he came up with himself, but they were all unique to the 15-gallon barrel program. So in other words, they would not fill 53-gallon barrels with these mash bills. These were unique to the single barrel 15-gallon program, which I think is a really, really cool idea. And Steve was getting some fantastic whiskeys out of these 15-gallon barrels at 2, 3, and sometimes coming up on 4 years old on a 15-gallon barrel. My favorite one of those was a malted rye that he did. I love malted rye in general, and this is why I mentioned the flavor characteristics being different from raw rye. So malted rye, especially in the case of the Limestone Branch stuff, tends to have more of this fruitiness to it. So rye can have a little bit of like black cherry. It can go weird like raw rye can. It can go weird like heavy black cherry, like 95.5 MGP style rye, right? The stuff that comes out of Lawrenceburg, Indiana. That can go almost Robitussin. Sometimes it can even go dill, which is even worse in my opinion, but that's just me. The malted rye, on the other hand, goes stone fruit, but it goes stone fruit like this. It'll lean into peach, it'll lean into apricot, and it's not straight up like the flesh of the peach or the flesh of the apricot. It's like when you bite into an apricot or a peach, and right in between the skin and the flesh, where you're still getting some of that texture of like the fuzziness of the skin, but you're also getting some of that fresh, juicy peach sort of flavor from the flesh. That's what malted rye gives me, and that's why I love it so much. And there's not a lot of it out there, not a lot of people making it, and why they're not, I don't know, because it is delicious, and I have plans for it commercially in the very near future. Absolutely 100 million%. I will be making some malted rye whiskey. Unfortunately, the Limestone Branch stuff may be kind of hard for you to find now, because I think that all that 15-gallon stuff got discontinued here recently, obviously with all the sort of mergers between Ross and Squibb / MGP, Luxco, and then Luxco had bought, you know, Limestone Branch / Yellowstone prior to that. And I think they sort of nixed that 15-gallon barrel program, which kind of sucks, because there was some great stuff in there, including a wheated bourbon that I absolutely loved. So I hope that kind of answers your question, gives you an idea, but be on the lookout for other malted rye whiskeys out there. I think maybe Stumpy Spirits does some malted rye. There's some other guys out there too that you might be able to find it from. So look around, see what you can't find. If not, make some on your own. But I definitely wouldn't try to take it up to the high temperatures and gelatinize it. And in fact, with the malted rye, in general, I think 145 is fine, right? Hit 145, get your conversion, get what you need out of it. And then if you want to, after that 30-minute hold, take it up to 160, 165 just for a slight pasteurization to kill off any bacteria, but I don't think that's even necessary if you've got a good yeast strain. So anyways, I hope that answered your question. Appreciate it. Keep the questions coming. Love y'all. Later.